Thank you. I didn't hear anything, but I think everything is true about me. At the beginning, I want to say thanks for organizers for opportunity to be here. And I am talking about one of prominent Lithuanian writers, Šatrijos Ragana. I believe that for most of you, it's the new name, but I think it is important maybe to say something about Lithuanian writers in this conference context. So it works. You know everything, and about the structure. Today I will be discussing the yearly works of and the short novel Viktutė, written by the prominent, as I said, Lithuanian writer Šatrijos Ragana. And the aim of my presentation is to introduce this yearly work's impact to women's liberation at the end of the 19th and the beginning of 20th centuries in Lithuania. I'm going to start my presentation by looking at the social and cultural context of Lithuania at the end of the 19th, at the beginning of 20th centuries. Then these works were written. Then I'll move on to a brief introduction to Šatrijos Raganas biography. And in the second part, I will investigate the plot of the short novel Viktutė, emphasizing features which can show the liberation of the main character. And as usual, at the end, I'm going to outline the main points of my presentation, showing the possible impact of Šatrijos Raganas' early work to Lithuanian women's emancipation. So, the social cultural context, it is, how to say, simple things, but we have to know these things. In the late 19th century and the early 20th century, the process of the formation of Lithuanian national community and modern society was taking place. This period is important as it was the beginning of the Lithuanian national movement. Consequently, the first Lithuanian newspapers were published and Lithuanian fiction began to increase. I want to emphasize that women writers were the most important creators of modern Lithuanian literature. I could mention these names: Žemaitė, Gabrielė Petkevičaitė-Bitė, Šatrijos Ragana, Lazdynų Pelėda. All these women wrote prose and some plays for theater. I would like to highlight that changes in the political field influence changes in women's situations. It means that at the end of the 19th century, the Lithuanian women's liberation took place. I would say that these processes were interconnected. Lithuanian women's emancipation could be seen as a part of a bigger process. Rachel G. Fuchs and Victoria Thompson book Women in 19th Century Europe begins with the statement: during the 19th century, European women of all countries and social classes experienced some of the most dramatic and enduring changes in their familial, working, and political lives. We can talk about several directions of women's emancipation. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, women entered public life, and at the same time, women became the main protagonists of literary works. Most often, research on the history of women's emancipation focuses on social processes or political decisions. Actually, I'm not questioning this approach, but I am suggesting that the emancipation of women should be seen in a broader perspective. This means that women's work not only mirrored the process of women's liberation, but also had an impact on it. Women's literary narratives offered new female characters and other life stories, which means that women writers were not only rewriting their own experiences, but they were also proposing new ways of behaving and living. Now, as I said, the next thing I want to talk about it is Šatrijos Ragana biography. Marija Pečkauskaitė, you see this girl. Under the pseudonym Šatrijos Ragana was born on the 8th of March 1877 into a noble family. The future writer grew up in Samogičija. She was one of 4 children in her family. Maria had a sister and 2 brothers. As was usual in noble families, the future writer and her sister were taught by home teachers. One of traditional skills she was taught was playing piano. As Maria herself said, she had a special talent for music taken from her mother, and for some time she had cherished the dream of becoming a famous musician. This dream was probably made impossible by the fact that her family could not finance her studies. I would like to point out that the character of the short novel Viktutė, the writer's alter ego, is also gifted with music and spends a lot of time playing the piano. And as was common in the upper social class, the writer's family language was Polish. The greatest influence for the fundamental shift in Šatrijos Raganas life story was contact with men who participated in the Lithuanian national movement. One of them was Povilas Višinskis. There you can see Šatrijos Ragana playing the piano, and here Povilas Višinskis. He was anthropologist, editor and political activist. Povilas Višinskis, who came from a peasant family, worked as a home teacher in Šatrijos Raganas family. It was he who introduced Šatrijos Ragana to the ideas of Lithuanian national movement and encouraged the future writer to learn Lithuanian and start writing in that language. He also organized the publication of Šatrijos Ragana's first works in the Lithuanian press. The changes in Šatrijos Raganas language show the transformation of the writer's identity. At the beginning of their correspondence, her letters to Povilas Višinskis were a mixture of 2 languages, Polish and Lithuanian. However, she gradually became more familiar with the Lithuanian language, and her most important works were written in Lithuanian. Another man who also had a great influence on Šatrijos Ragana was the priest Kazimieras Bukontas. You can see him here. He was the vicar in Užventis, where the writer's family lived. The bond between the 2 young people that began at the time lasted all their lives. Povilas Višinskis was a left-wing intellectual, while Kazimieras Bukontas stood for the right-wing and Christian ideology. Šatrijos Ragana had developed a strong emotional relationship with both of these men, but there came a time when she had to choose between them and therefore was choosing between 2 ideological lines. Why I am highlighting Šatrijos Raganas relationship with these 2 men? In the context of this conference, bearing in mind the importance of the relationship between Rainis and Aspazija, this woman's life was also strongly influenced by significant men. The importance of relationships and partnerships also appears in Šatrijos Raganas early work, with a young girl's choice between 2 men and 2 ideologies described in some length in the short novel Viktutė. After the father's death, Šatrijos Ragana worked as a home teacher for a while, and in 1905 to 1907 she spent time in Switzerland at the universities of Zurich and Fribourg. The woman could also study. In Switzerland, she studied German and French literature, sociology, philosophy, aesthetics, theology, and education. I would like also to emphasize that the writer was also involved in the women movement, and in 1907 she was one of the participants in the Lithuanian Women's Congress. She was contributing to the education of the younger generation of girls through her pedagogical writings and activities. The rest of her life after studies abroad was devoted to teaching and charity work. Šatrijos Ragana entered the history of Lithuanian literature as a prose writer, having written many small prose texts and several short novels such as Viktutė and Sename dvare. Let's turn to the early works of Šatrijos Ragana. Her first work was published in 1896 in the illegal Lithuanian press. In the first text, written before the publication of the short novel Viktutė in 1903, the main protagonists are young girls looking for their own way in life. They are young, noble women seeking intellectual and financial independence. The searching of the girls has two aspects. On the one hand, the life goals they have are defined mainly by a positivist ideology, ideas of being useful to others. On the other hand, the choices they may have to be in line with their own inner preferences. So the narrative of these works naturally focuses on the inner world of these girls. I will now briefly introduce the story of one of Šatrijos Raganos most important works, the short novel Viktutė. So this work is written in the form of a diary. Every evening, a young noble woman, Viktutė, describes the events of the day and her reactions to them. Writing her diary helps the protagonist, who is also the narrator, to know herself better. At the beginning of the short novel, the narrator of the diary confesses that she decided to abandon her plans to become a pianist and to give up her studies in order to contribute to her family's well-being by taking care of the daily household chores. In her diary, the young girl sets herself a new goal in life: to help her parents and poor illiterate people. It also tells how Viktutė meets and falls in love with a Dr. Antanas, an intelligent Lithuanian of the younger generation. The love story is accompanied by a turning point in the girl's self-awareness. From a pro-Polish noble woman, she becomes a member of the Lithuanian intelligentsia. The narrative focuses on the girl's everyday life and her relationship with the new town doctor. However, what is the most important in this work is not the events themselves, but their reflection and the description of the impact on the girl's self-perception. The short novel Viktutė and the other yearly works by Šatrijos Ragana demonstrate how social and cultural issues at that time became part of women's inner reality. The plot of Viktutė reveals one of the most important stages in the development of women's self-awareness. The narrative of the girl's development takes place at home. The girl who is progressing towards being a true Lithuanian does not really leave her home. Here she meets her ideal partner, here she matures. However, it is not the women's community or the mother, but a man who is preparing her for the new social role. The relationship with the significant other helps her to become a conscious Lithuanian. A man brings into a woman's life the public and culture's values and norms and influences the direction of her life. Nevertheless, the narrative focuses on an inner story of the young girls, which allows us to observe her progress towards national maturity, higher consciousness, and more intensive activity from the point of view of the woman herself. To sum up, Šatrijos Raganas fiction as a social practice created patterns of exemplary behavior that shaped a certain way of life. More importantly, Šatrijos Raganas' work is also a story about how a woman discovers her voice. These features suggest that Viktutės story is about women's emancipation. And the conclusion. Šatrijos Raganas' early works present those stages of women's development that represent important steps towards independence, emancipation, intellectual and financial equality. These narratives begin to establish the artistic concept of the independent woman. It is described in a specific language that reveals women's experience from their own perspective. Viktutė shapes her own image for the reader and also chooses to describe those events and people that most help to reveal the uniqueness of her personality. The exemplary story of her life is meant to inspire women readers to make important life choices towards social and cultural liberation.